I love that you mentioned diplomacy and diplomats. So I teach courses on diplomacy, and one of the things I've seen emerge in the last few years is this dichotomy between private diplomacy, which is what we were used to when we studied the Cold War and post-Cold War conflicts, and now we have public diplomacy. Almost all diplomacy, take the Iran-Israel war, the 12-day war, as Trump calls it. How much of that war was conducted via social media? This is now, so you have this public-facing diplomacy where you have, during wartime, leaders, their representatives, their proxies, conveying messaging both to their enemies, to their allies, and to a supposedly neutral audience, all through social media, right? So it is not so much the nuclear age, but the age of the algorithm and how that amplifies diplomacy in a way that never, ever existed. And so this is, I think, this lends to that dilution that then others can take advantage of. Because at the end of the day, if you want to threaten a country or you want to garner support, how you articulate that via social media, whether you use all caps, whether you use images, memes, all of these things play into how effective that is. And you see that most on TikTok, and when, after the October 2023 Hamas attacks against Israel, the information warfare between the two sides and how it played out on college campuses. I was at a big one where a lot of that was taking place at UCLA, and how that played out on social media, and even among high school kids who I talk to, and their understanding of conflict is now shaped by what TikTok, which is partially controlled by the Chinese government, feeds them and chooses to feed them and amplify.
So here's a specific example which might be helpful to what you're saying. With the 12-day war recently, I think the White House wanted that to just be a bombing run. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Just a bombing run. We're gonna go, we're so power. It was about power, it was about precision, take it out. And it was the press that wrote, "America enters the war."
Yeah.
And that is a major headline. And that probably made the White House deeply upset because they don't want to be seen as entering into a war. And so I think another real problem we have right now with all of this tension ratcheting up is how angry, and I'm just talking about America now, the political sides are at one another. That to my eye, because I'm an apolitical writer, no one has any idea what my politics are. I write about war and weapons neutrally. But I can observe, and it seems to me like the different warring political parties inside the United States are so intent on taking down the other side. They do it, from my eye, at the national security peril. In other words, a headline against Trump is better for them than U.S. national security or world security. I'm curious what you think.
Well, I think we're all saying something that's derivations of the same thing, versions of the same thing, right? There's a massive information warfare landscape happening, and it is that fog of war that we look through that gives us that tension about what's actually happening at the ground level. If you think about conflict as being what humans will do to each other, there's layers on top of that that create this distortion of what you can expect. And there's so much activity in the information landscape that it's very distorted what could actually happen. We have a term at CIA, and when we talk about covert influence, activities to shape information, we talk about volume and speed, which gets right back to your point about TikTok and social media. We've always engaged in information warfare, but the volume and the speed was much less and much slower because you had to fly fucking pamphlets and drop them out of airplanes and hope that the people reading it were reading the right dialect of Arabic or Spanish. You had to hope. And then once there was a rainstorm, all of your pamphlets are done. And if you're trying to make it look like they're not coming from America, there's all sorts of other layers to that. Well, now an algorithm that you don't even control is contributing to that. And then you've got creators, content creators all over the place that have no added value to the content they're creating, who are just clipping, cutting, and putting things together and then further being amplified, right? So the volume of information is massive, and the speed at which it disseminates is huge, and the algorithm can dictate whether you see it or don't see it at all. So while I appreciate your point of view, that there's this tension and there's this growing concern, I honestly think that your opinion on that is because you're informed and intelligent. And there are huge groups of people who are completely oblivious to where we actually are on a sliding scale of approaching conflict.
Where are we?
I think that's what we're really here to discuss. I would argue that we are not entering a phase of less conflict. we are going to enter a phase 5 to 10 years of more conflict, increasing conflict, a willingness to engage in more kinetic conflict, to use your term. I don't think that we're showing the various global power competitors of the world that it will not be tolerated. I think we're showing the global power competitors of the world that violence, kinetic attacks, cyber warfare, weapons development is going to be accepted.
My wish is that America could overcome her tribal anger, that a lot of Americans have toward one another that are in different political parties. Because I feel like America is a leader in terms of security and safety, or can be and should be. And that all of this amplification of the rhetoric is deeply dividing. The fancy word is divisive, but it's just dividing. And that if there's any place that one's enemies or adversaries, or call them what you will, can take advantage of that, it is right there.
Is that wishful thinking?
For me to say, I am a very wishful thinking person. I mean, I write about the grimmest, darkest subjects imaginable, with a smile on my face, because I just am naturally, I'm naturally optimistic. I'm the mother of two, college-age boys. Of course I'm going to be optimistic.
Andrew was just saying that he thinks there's going to be more conflict going forward. We have 9 nations now that have these nuclear weapons that some might argue creates stability, but some might argue that it only takes one individual. And you said there's 6 nations hosting those nuclear weapons. I don't know, sometimes I think, gosh, you only need one miscommunication or one mistake from one person who is, I don't know, not doing too well mentally or having a bad day. That's kind of how I think about it. And I'm like, probabilistically, if you just stretch it out, some point that's going to happen. Some point that's going to happen.
Well, you're absolutely right. And that is why, it'll be interesting if we maybe talk about around just from the, specifics about what happened and, why that's is or is not important. Because I, just having looked at nuclear weapons so microscopically recently, I believe that existential threat, the global catastrophic risk of a nuclear, of a flame that starts that movement toward a nuclear use, is a sort of line that must never be crossed. And so while all war is terrible, there is always a solution on the other side of the war. Peace can be made, but not with nuclear. And so that, I look at things right now through that lens, which is how I saw the most recent bombing.
You mentioned, Andrew, talked about Israel and Iran being a proxy war. So that kind of piqued my interest. I almost reflexively want to disagree, but I want to hear more about why you think so I can better understand proxy conflict from that angle.
Yeah, well, the way I see it, Israel is ratcheting up its aggression against proxies that Iran has been using to threaten it for decades.
Right.
But Israel is also dependent on American weapons to do that. It's also dependent on American intelligence to do that. It's dependent on American support financially and economically. So it needs America to wage its conflict moving forward. If America were to say, Israel, we don't support you, then Israel would take a different approach without a doubt. So the funding, the support, the intelligence flow, the economic support coming from the United States is what empowers Israel to prosecute its conflict. Without that support, Israel would take a different approach to the conflict.
But then proxy would imply that Israel's acting as an agent or at the behest of the United States. So the United States, rather than getting involved directly with Iran up until last week, operates through another entity.
That's the misunderstanding about proxy war. You're looking first for some sort of conflict that already exists. The conflict between Israel and Iran already exists. The proxy then, the proxy relationship happens when an outsider, a third party, comes in and exacerbates the conflict by putting more fuel on an existing fire. It's not that Israel is the agent of the United States. It's that Israel already wants to prosecute some sort of conflict. We come in and we're essentially the fuel to help exacerbate that fire.
So who's the proxy in this conflict?
Israel.
Okay.
Israel's the proxy for the United States, who wants to diminish Iran in the same way that Israel wants to diminish Iran. This specific conflict is so fascinating because every fucking buddy wants Israel to degrade Iran. Saudi Arabia wants that. The United States wants that. All of the European Union wants that. Israel wants that. Everybody wants to see a degraded Iran. So Israel, especially after what it's been doing in Gaza and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, Israel's desperate for anything it can do to win back favor for the Abraham Accords, as a democratic country, you name it. It's looking for an option, and Iran is a very convenient option for them to build back relationships that they've killed along with the attacks in Gaza.
If the reasons are different, does that still make one a proxy of the other? So Israel's objections to Iran, and it's the reason it sees Iran as a adversary, might differ from the United States. And there's a Venn diagram, there's some overlap, but there's also a tremendous amount that doesn't overlap.
Right.
Same thing with the Saudis, the Gulf states, other regional states that see Iran as a threat. They see it for different reasons. Does that still, and I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm just trying to understand, does that still make them a proxy if their motives are different?
I would say yes, because it's not about the parts of the Venn diagram that don't overlap. It's about the parts that do. It's about the convenience of Israeli citizens dying, Israeli soldiers dying, Israeli weapons being spent. That's the benefit of a proxy conflict. It's not American citizens who are at risk. It's not American soldiers who are dying. It's not American weapons that are being spent. We get to build our surplus. And if anything, we get to build extra and sell it to Israel, which is benefiting our economy. So this is the uncomfortable truth behind proxy war, is it's all the benefits of a wartime environment without any of the risks.
But then what also happens, and you can look at Vietnam as a great example, is the proxy wars that are supposed to be low cost for the United States end up blowing up into being a disaster for the United States.
So I think of Vietnam, I think classic proxy war,
Yes.
right? Right. Khrushchev gave that speech, I think 1963, whenever it was, about wars of national liberation, and that they would be fought in what was then called the Third World. Vietnam being a classic case. There I see absolutely, right? First you had the French, in French Indochina, and then the United States bailing the French out. Arguably the French were maybe a proxy for US interests. They were part of that firewall that were keeping the dominoes from falling. But again, I'm trying to understand the Israel-United States proxy angle here. And that's a unique definition of proxy, I guess.
I'll give you an example. I'm going to butt in with an example.
Yeah.
You tell me if this is right or wrong.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, the Iraq War was a proxy war for the same reason.
The Iraq War,
We were trying-
the 2000, which the
George
2000,
Bush and Dick Cheney's Iraq War.
Right.
We're trying to weaken Iran.
You think the Iraq War was an attempt to weaken Iran?
I mean, you pipe in here, but that's how it started. That was the original intention.
Mm-hmm.
And the deep, tragic irony is what we have now, which is Iran is running around.
Why does the United States want to weaken Iran?
The United States
Because of what
wants,
happened to your family in 1979.
But why? But why does it? What's the beef the U.S. has with Iran? I
Because
mean,
they had
I know
our
that's
hostages for 400 and something days in 1979, and we will not let that go until that is,
How is that? What does justice look like?
I'm not saying that's.
Yeah.
I'm
No,
just
but I'm saying
that's,
why are we at war with Iran, or not at war, but why are we at conflict with Iran?
I mean, I think there's a lot of different valid answers for that.
Mm-hmm.
But where I would take this, especially to keep it really accessible to the layperson, right, is that the United States wants zero competition for being the single superpower in the world. It wants no competition for that. It wants to remain the single superpower everywhere, because being the single superpower gives your civilians, gives your population security, but it also means that you have the lion's share of all the resources in the world. And basic economics teaches us that all economics is based on resources. So Iran's goals to create a Shia state, to create a Shia crescent of power and influence across the Middle East, is in stark contrast to what would benefit the United States. What the United States wants is to maintain a Sunni majority, because that's where the oil is coming from, is majoritively for the United States, Sunni, wealthy, Khaliji states.
Even though Iran's the second largest.
Not for the United States.
Yeah, not for the United States.
But it was, right? During the United States' greatest period of prosperity, it was a bipolar world. So unipolarity is something we've had since the 90s onward. And yes, there's been tremendous success, but arguably unipolarity has been destabilizing.
What's unipolarity?
Where you have one world power basically dominating, which has kind of been the case since the end of the Cold War. And now we've seen a rise of other sort of poles, maybe with China being one. But you had, during the entirety of the Cold War, it was a bipolar structure. You had the Soviets, you had the US. And they were dictating everything else on the chessboard that was the globe, right, in front of us.